Thank you very much. The topic which has been chosen is really very important, and the significance of this topic has increased in a present pandemic because more than virus, being locked down and no physical movements, exercises, no intellectual stimulations are causing more problems, and they are more related to our physical health as well as psychological health. So we in this psychological and social life is not just a consequences of good health. Like, I mean, when we see someone is having a good health, and when we are suffering, we believe that that person must be the happiest person living in this world. Or also when we have to sacrifice few things because of our not so good health, and then we suffer, we lose something, and then we understand that health is somewhere coming in between. Bad health is coming in between our feelings of happiness. However, the tide has changed, and actually, it is what leads people to live a healthy and long life. So, it's not always the moment from the health towards the happy. Healthy people are happy, but happy people can be healthy. So happiness can bring the health in us.
The microphone.
So hope I'm audible, madam.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, thank you. So it's the other way, and there is a compelling evidence for this. So rather than I say something, I would like to take to the contemporary research findings, and they themselves will be very clear, make their point clear to you. So before going to that, why I chose positive psychology aspects, and Lalita madam has, Vijaya madam has already suggested me about lifestyle issues, and yes, lifestyle, Ayurveda, all very important. And then we have to seek our cultural roots, understanding this recent research in our connecting it to our cultural roots. That is what my attempt is. So in short, positive psychology is a scientific study of optimal human functioning. So whatever human beings are capable, they are able to do, they should function very well. And this functioning can be at all levels, emotional basically, and intellectual levels, cognitive levels. So it studies various contributions to our health, what makes our life healthy, and how we can thrive for ourselves and also others. So the significant contributors to the health from positive psychology, the areas which they study are like positive emotions, like a happiness, love, right? Life meaning, what makes our life meaningful. So the purpose in our life matters. Engaging work, the experiences of flow. So the work is not mere, what you can say, something to be for earning, but one engrows and enjoys, one develops oneself, and our close relationships, how they are significant, and our strengths and virtues. Now you may say these are some common sense things which we experience in our day-to-day life. However, we need to have really the insight in them, little bit more understanding of them, and how they play a very important role in our social, emotional well-being and health. So that is what the purpose. So this positive psychology in health, what is the connection between that? So first, let's understand what we can say, like positive health is not only as a long and disease-free life, but also there is an attempt to have a less frequent and briefer elements, physical, psychological, and greater restoring health, ability to recuperative and restore our health. We do experience some disturbances in our health, but coming back to the original state, and a rapid wound healing, more physiological results we can have. So we are prepared to meet the challenges, and some energy we need to have always reserved with us. So we become less stressful. What would be the tomorrow to face? And also chronic but non-debilitating diseases. So there may be some people suffering from some like blood pressure and diabetes, and so So in such, these are chronic, long-term, but that need not disable a person, that need not stop a person living a healthy and happy life, and how that can be achieved. So these are the some of the concerns, and I think positive psychology has some answer to this. And so what so far all carefully conducted research, well systematically controls research studies show that this positive health asset indeed predict a good health. I mean, one who is living a positive life, a positive, healthy life, in future he is going to have a good health. That is what research studies are showing. So there are a lot of research studies are longitudinal. Maybe even 80 years studies have been going on. So there are following positive psychological assets which have been seen having a significant influence on the health. So positive emotions, life satisfaction. It is experiencing not only positive emotions, but meaning in a life, and also reducing negative emotions. And optimism, hope, forgiveness, self-regulation, vitality, jest, life meaning and purpose. Also helping others and volunteering is some of the one of the very important aspect of healthy life. We will just discuss later on. And good social relationships and spirituality and religiosity. So these are some of the important aspects related to the positive psychology, which are correlated well with the physical health as well as psychological. So I'll be briefing more about physical health because it is obvious positive psychology studies various aspects is definitely having some good relation with the psychological health. So with this background, I would like to just share with you some key studies in the field and what they are suggesting us. Okay, so there was this very popular NUN study which shows there is a positive link between psychological health assets like many of we discussed and health of the person individual. So it was a longitudinal study which was done for years and they studied a group of nuns. And why they chose the nuns? Because nuns live a very systematic life, what you can say. Their lifestyles doesn't differ much from each other. Their reproductive health is same, and various other eating habits, daily routines and rituals are same. So they were seen as one of the very good population for a study where we can control various other factors which can influence our health. And what they did is they had written some autobiographical essays. This is a system whenever they join church for sisterhood, and when they joined in 20s, they have to write autobiographical essays. What researchers did 6 decades later, they had this access to these archives where more than 200 nuns had written their autobiographical essays. And through that autobiographical essays, they scored their emotional content. Okay, so one way of scoring was like number of positive emotions like happiness, love, which they experienced, what they have written at that when they were in their 20s. And the number of more positive moments, more what you can say, happiness they experienced. So they correlated this positivity score with the mortality, how long nuns lived. And the findings were astonishing. The nuns, those who were in upper 25 range, who expressed more positive emotions, their asses. They strikingly lived on average 10 years longer than those who experienced fewer positive emotions. Those were in a bottom 25%. So when they were ranked on the score of the positive emotions. So you can see clearly the nun who experienced more positive emotions in their 20s when they joined, showing a tremendous health benefits, and they live longer for 10 years. So somewhere the conclusion is happier nuns live longer than less happy, but not depressed. So this is something very important. Like the other nuns, the bottom 25, they were not depressed. So remember that it is just having positive emotion experience. So they were all psychologically healthy, but one who was more happier lived longer. So that is what the strength of positive emotions in long term. So if we take this finding in a context, like unhealthy behavior like smoking costs 7 years of life, right? So which would be the better life, like happy smoker or unhappy non-smoker? So of course, it is not advocated to be a smoker, because one obviously losing 7 years of life on an average. But if someone is happy, he can add 10 years more. So sometimes people wonder, like someone is a smoker but still living longer than the other. There is somewhere maybe these factors like happiness or the nature of the person which may be playing. The important point here is that the strength of positive emotion is more than a negative lifestyle or a negative habits, what we can say. So why not to celebrate this positivity of the human nature? So that is the point. So in that context, if we see this, so we understand the significance of learning to be happy. So this was one very well-controlled popular study in the field. And then there were other studies which are very commonly conducted, like what is the relation between positive emotions and common cold, which was done by Cohen. So in his study, what he did in a first step is like he studied 334 healthy adults who experienced some positive emotions like happiness, being pleased, lively, relaxed, and also negative emotional experience, depressed, anxious, hostile. And they were measured using some standard psychological test over a few weeks. Okay, so he assessed these individuals on positive emotions and negative emotions. That was the first step. In a second step, he invited them to the lab and exposed them to the rhinovirus. You know that rhinovirus is a common cold virus. And he exposed them to the rhinovirus to the nasal drops. And they were quarantined for a few days or months. And then they were monitored for the development of the common cold. So you can see people experiencing positive emotions, people experiencing negative emotions were there, and all were exposed to rhinovirus. And then he wanted to compare them on common cold. So again, findings were what you can say very promising. Like higher positive emotional experiences were related to lower risk of developing a cold and fewer reports of the symptoms, whereas negative emotions were associated with the reports of more symptoms. So we see clearly how positive emotions make a difference. Okay, so in this context, like we are in this pandemic, and coronavirus is a kind of rhinovirus. And there was a recent study done by Sheldon, and he studied large number of volunteers, the same design. However, he assessed them on positive emotions of happiness and hope, primarily hope or optimism. And he quarantined them for the 14 days. And at the time of quarantine, they were exposed with this rhinovirus, and amount of the cold was measured in them throughout the quarantine period and after the 14 days. Again, these findings are what we can say consistent with the earlier findings. So, however, there is some surprising shift in the findings. So many of us may believe being optimistic, hopeful is associated with what you can say less amount of common cold. So people will be less infected by the rhinovirus if they are optimistic, but not. There is no relation between hope, which is we say cognitive aspect of the happiness. Hope is more of attitude. Okay, optimism is more of attitude, belief about the future. However, what you believe about the future, that future is good, better, is not at all associated with the person develops the cold or not. So this cognitive aspect of the happiness, what we call hope, is not that much playing any role. However, fun and cheerfulness, that is what we say affective aspect of the happiness, that is expressed emotions. So emotional aspect of the happiness, right? The cheerful, very active, happy, that was significantly associated with the common cold. So people who are high on the fun and cheerfulness showed low level of the cold, right? However, people who believe tomorrow would be better, it didn't benefit much. It didn't benefit. So the point here is like what is the lesson out of this? What we should learn out of this study? That in short, like have fun as much during the pandemic. So spend some happy moments with the family members. And now we understand it's very difficult to in this restricted environment to have fun, but still people can have, like they can garden something, they can play with the puppies, they can have some comedy things happening, or they can spend some time in dance activities. So this is going to help a lot. However, things are happening opposite way. The moment restrictions are removed, people are going out and spending more time in fun activities. Actually, that is not going to happen. During the pandemic, this fun is happening, but after the pandemic, or when there is no these infections, hope plays very important role, because that is where we have to be optimistic, because we have lost something. Some people have lost some jobs, some people have somebody suffering in a family and all that. So it's difficult keeping ourselves merry or smiley, but that matters. Now you may, some people may definitely have difficulty when someone their dear and near one is suffering from this, how it to be happy, but more cheerful you are, try to be, actually you are helping the person who is suffering. So the affective aspect of this happiness plays a significant role, what I can say, important role in protecting us from the rhinovirus. And thank God, children spend a lot of time in fun, and that may be one of the good protector for their from this rhinoviruses and all that. So these are some of the studies what they are indicating significantly. And there are some other studies also which give some promising results. And this was a longitudinal cohort study where similar age people staying in old age is almost more than 43,000 adults in Japan. And what they found, that the lack of sense of life worth living, that is what we call ikigai. It's very popular in Japan. So life worth living, the feeling of life worth living, that's called their ikigai, was significantly associated with the risk of all-cause mortality. If someone is not experiencing this ikigai, that is related to the mortality over time. And those who reported ikigai were more likely to be alive at 7 years follow-up compared to who didn't. So people who experienced ikigai were definitely living longer. And this increasing mortality in the people who didn't experience this ikigai was from the cardiovascular disease and suicide. So you can understand how the experience of ikigai is a protective against heart ailments, okay, heart diseases, and depression or suicide, mental health. So this is also some cultural aspects, and in that context, yoga, meditation, and Ayurveda lifestyle have some what you can say cultural contributions to our health. So in a study of US adults, having a life purpose plays a protective role for the heart health. So people who experience a meaning in their life, okay, and they followed up for 2 years, and the level of life purpose was prospectively related to the lower risk of what you can say heart attacks. So people who found some life purpose in their life, in fact, in spite of ill health, they were having more protection from the heart attacks. So this is what some studies in various parts of the world. So what are the ways to live long and healthy life? What are positive psychologies to offer? So it recognizes the significance of C, sleeping well, eating healthy, and exercising regularly. How it proposes also was 3 important aspects like volunteering, optimism, and social relationship, which play significant role in long, healthy life. So I would like to, like many of member of renowned scientists at IWSA are involved in the volunteering. So I would request participant, like, why do you think volunteering has a health effects, not only psychological, physical? So I would request your interaction. Yes, please.
So may I speak?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sir. So what I think is we are Homo sapiens, and we are very much connected towards like animals like monkey and gorilla. So there is a kind of social structure, or there is kind of mutation of what I say. There is kind of adaptation to that kind of this thing, environment and association. So I think whenever we do something in society, like volunteering or showing people something, so maybe that makes us think, our body think that we are going to adapt and we are going to live longer. So maybe that is connected to our brains that way.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sawant, for your inputs. So, from biological perspective, according to him, like we are living in a connected world, and volunteering is what connects us each other. And precisely, I guess that's what you meaning. Like, and we are evolved in that way, and we have progressed in that way. So, volunteering has definitely benefits biologically and also for the health. Yes. Definitely, we are programmed in such a way. We live in a collected cooperative world, communities. That is true, sir. Any other perspectives, any other reasons? What you have experienced when you have volunteer, what you experience change?
Can I say, can I say something, sir?
Yeah.
So actually volunteering, giving voluntary services to the community, it gives a sense of satisfaction and also makes you happy that you've done something for them.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing other people happy also, releases those happiness hormones inside you also. Mm-hmm. So, of course, happiness is a very big factor, and the satisfaction, what I would say, we get from it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Smita, madam.
Yeah. Same thing I also wanted to say. Thank you, Smita. We sail in the same boat. Release of happy hormones are really...
Yeah, that's why we are serving the same organization.
May I say something, Dr. Tawkari?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, because I have been volunteering for the last 31 years in the spiritual realm. I've been a spiritual trainer and working in that, and I have found a very distinct difference, in the sense that when we start doing volunteer work, I becomes we, like I don't exist myself for myself alone, and that I shifts to we and mine shifts to ours. This is a very important factor, because we are all the time focused on mine, I, so all the time, focused on my problems, my things, my this thing. But when we start living, out of that box and expand our consciousness, I think it helps a lot. It improves our health, and somehow, nature, when somebody or some, entity is willing to do work and help nature in its work, somehow nature helps in giving more time for that entity to live on, perhaps, so that more work can be done. And this is my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, madam. You have taken it at an entirely different level, and yes, that is something really we should take it very seriously to your experiences. Yeah, and it is good to be good. Yeah. Yeah, so some of you have said like it incites happy hormones, happiness, and we have seen happiness is related to positive health. Please share experiences. Yes, so yeah. So very important inputs I have gone, and just I will go through the slide, and we will just summarize this. So what the research has shown that helping others and doing regular volunteer work in community is one of the effective way to achieve a sense of life, meaning and purpose, what you have all pointed out. Not only satisfaction, but we see the meaning in a life, purpose in a life, and it is something serious. At a deeper level, we sense something, and even at a level of losing ourselves and being one with the nature and surroundings. Yes, and these are not some, exclusive experiences. We can allow us to experience. That is what Madam has pointed out. Research shows that among elder people who volunteer regularly are healthier and also live longer. So there are clear-cut indications of what are these health benefits, and in a longitudinal study of nationally representative sample of community dwelling, people staying in old age homes, US adults, volunteerism predicted a lower risk of hypertension 4 years later. So you can, one volunteering today risked the lower for almost next 4 years. So we can understand what is the significance of this. And in another study, who regularly volunteered for self-oriented motives, however, didn't exhibit lower risk for mortality. While those who regularly and frequently volunteer for other-oriented motives, like helping the others, okay, reducing their pain or making them happy. So it is, our focus is on the other and ourselves. And in that case, it shows clearly the benefit of volunteering. So what we can say in short is it is good to be good. And as you shared your experience, how it is effective. So my experience when I volunteered was something like time pressure went off. Like always we think like I have to do this, I have this task, I have to achieve this and all that. And I don't have a time. And when I volunteered by something, I was free from this pressure of the time. So immediately I came to the present, right? I was not thinking about the future. If I do this tomorrow, I will get that. That was not there. So when I did, I was not expecting for tomorrow. I got a glimpse of that. And that is what we all experience. And I came immediately in touch with the present, and my actions ended in themselves. There was no any purpose behind that. So when I did for half an hour, whatever volunteering, it started there, it ended there, and it brought a change. So I was completely myself, and I was not bound to anything, anybody, but I was doing something which really freed me from this. And I think that removes the pressure and stress from our mind. And that is what I found in IWSA. Like there was such a vigilant, happy environment when we visited and all that. And my students were so profound and excited by that thing. So that's really, I see why this young, what I can say, well-experienced group of people doing such a wonderful work. Tirelessly, right? So that was volunteering, how it can bring a tremendous health benefits. Then there is a optimism, that is kind of saying be happy and don't worry attitude. So it is a disposition kind of attitude to an expectation that future will have more positive events than the negative. So that is optimism. Optimism is not like future is absolutely going to be all the time good. Maybe somewhere we are irrational, or all the time it is going to be bad. So there is a tendency also, if some negative thing happens, so tomorrow is going to be also bad, something like that. So, and we make the consequences to the things in our life. So like tomorrow is going to be more bad or more better. The optimism suggests that there are going to be events in our future, and just believe that positive events, happy moments will be more than the negative and sad moments. That is the optimism, and that is more close to the realistic attitude. And this is simply to attend and acknowledge the positive things in our life, right? So when we become demanding, we lose on the positive things in our life. But when we stop ourselves little bit demanding, say for even for 2 days, we don't demand anything, then we see that nature, life, people around, they give so much things to us, and just attending and acknowledging brings optimism. So optimistic people engage more actively with the world through better problem solving and frequent quality social contacts. So when they're optimistic, they are more outgoing, and their quality of the relationship improves, right? So that again I found in IWSA. And better problem solving abilities, because our mind opens up for new ideas, new options. So it has been seen that in a happy discussions, a lot of discoveries have come when people were, coming together and so happily spending time. And that is what basic the purpose of the conference and seminars. When we meet, we are happy, and that opens up our mind for the new ideas and discussion. So empirical research shows that optimism relates to a good health and long life. So various research studies, like among asymptomatic men with the HIV, people who are optimism showed optimism. They slowed the onset of AIDS over next 18 months. So even in such a life-threatening diseases, we can see the positive impact of optimism on the serious viruses. And over an 8-year follow-up, optimism predicted better pulmonary lung functions among older men, even when smoking was controlled. So these are some research, modern research showing. And in a longitudinal study, older men and women showed that optimism predicted not only better health, but also lower levels of pain. So pain is something which is there with us. However, we try to live a luxurious life, protective life. However, people who are optimistic experience lower amount of the pains. So they could come out of that more healthily, happily. And a research study which was done by Park at US large sample of representation older adults. He studied them for 2 years, and he found that optimism predicted a lower likelihood of strokes, even after controlling from chronic illnesses, social factors, etc. So the people who are suffering from blood pressures and all that may fear a stroke, but the optimism is something which plays a very protective role. And the third very important aspect is the social relationships. So the social relationship basically is supporting social relationships, social groups were associated with the longevity, less cognitive decline with aging, and greater resistance for the infectious diseases and better management of the chronic illnesses. So people should engage, and it's not necessary all people are social or extrovert. But even having few relationship where you experience some support, emotional support, understanding, they play wonder. I mean, important is having experience of this social support. So research so far provides compelling evidence that positive psychological health predict or is associated with the various health outcomes and also longevity. So to get to the end section of this, what we can see is that positive psychology, various intervention influence our biological and behavioral processes. So these emotions are acting somewhere on our biology. May not be they are acting for very long term, but they do act for some period of time and can bring a behavioral changes. And that is very significant to bring the lifestyle changes. So, for example, inducing positive emotions speed up cardiovascular recovery from a stressful event, and training in mindful meditation can boost immune functions. So, meditation in such a time of pandemic is a very important. And resilience training reduces total cholesterol among the middle-aged adults. So, see, there are some of the resilience means coping with the stress. Okay, making ourselves enable ourselves to deal with the stress and bouncing back. This is what we can say, bouncing back ability when we suffer from something. There are other techniques, counting one's blessings at the end of the day. It makes wonder, it plays wonders. So it has been seen that like keeping a gratitude journal, like what are the good things happen, being happy, like sun is shining today, right from that to my neighborhood came and like had some good conversation with me. These are all blessings, what we say. We should not take it for granted in that sense. So even if we sometimes spend at a month end and see who are the people who helped me a lot in my life, maybe my childhood friend, maybe a person from a place who is very uneducated or like something, but he has somewhere helped you in some way. So when we see these things people have done right from our childhood, in our college days or whatever, why not to at least give a one call and talk to them like, yeah, this thing you really helped me, these things really at that point of time. It may not be only material help, but even emotional supports and help has brought a tremendous benefit to me. And you will see that not only you change your life, you change the life in the sense that person experiences the sudden positive burst of emotions, and that gives a lot of meaning to the life, to that person, and that gives a lot of meaning to us also. So keeping that gratitude journal and using one's signature strengths of character in novel ways. We are all born with the strengths. We make a mistake of comparing ourselves with the others, and then we don't look at our strengths, and we all born with our signature strengths, unique strengths, and we should always try to express. So when we use our capacities and abilities to the fullest, we are more happier. And believe me, so many creative people, when they're interviewed, they feel that they're not active what they're expected, but they're very active compared to the others. But they feel that they are not enough done or enough active. That means still they are not able to release their total potential and capacities. And the journey of doing that is a happy journey. So with this kind of little studies, and since I hope I'm doing justice to the time and not over exceeding, so I would like to conclude that positive health asset like positive emotions like happiness, life satisfaction, optimism, positive relationship, life purpose are prospectively associated with good health. If tomorrow, after 10 years, 4 years, 2 years, I want to be healthy, I have to live this life today. Okay. And whatever way it is measured, and interventions have been developed that increase these assets and lasting effects requiring a lifestyle change. So the point here is health. With the age, there is going to be some effect on that. I will try to maintain it. But something is there in my hand, is that definitely I can make my day a happy day. Today I can be a happy person. And even when we are suffering, and if we can keep ourselves happy, physically unhealthy and all that, definitely it not only helps us, other people also become less stressed, and they are more willing to interact and connect with us. That is what. So what is in our hand to deliberately practice in is happiness. So there is a convincing evidence that these emotions bring the positive change in a health, and that is sufficient, bringing a change in health for 1 year, 2 years, even it is not lasting for lifetime, but that gives the sufficient scope and hope to bring the lifestyle changes. So in that context, it is very important, and we need to deliberately practice bringing this happiness. And the way is to volunteer or optimism and having more social interactions. So the bringing lifestyle changes are very important, and it's a really difficult task. It has to be processed slowly, because whatever change we bring, we need to sustain this. And at this point, I think Ayurveda, in our roots, like Ikigai in Japan, so it helps them. So similarly, our roots in Ayurveda can help us to bring these changes, and that is where I see positive psychology. What it advocates, if it has to be practiced, Ayurveda, and the knowledge of what we say science of life can help us how to do that, which guides us living in harmony with the universe. So as you rightly pointed out, our social relations are part of this universe. Connecting with the nature is universe. Connecting with the other people is a universe. So we are having a larger view than this just social relationship. And in order to develop optimum health, so practice of meditation, what we call mindfulness, okay, awareness of our own mind, and also accepting whatever the thoughts, feelings, or physical sensations we are getting as it is, which was advocated by the Ayurveda, is a key to develop this optimum health. So we have to bring this meaning in a life, bring the optimism, and be open to the universe. We have to practice some of the important principles, and key to that is a mindfulness, I believe very strongly. And this is what I wanted to share. And thank you very much for your attendance and interaction. I wanted to interact more, so it is open for discussion if time permits. And thank you very much for all of you having this opportunity. We can Prasar as well as Indian Women Scientists Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We definitely interacted
on Ayurveda, diabetes, and lifestyle management. So the recent pandemic has also kind of given us overview that people with diabetes are likely to get affected by COVID with more severe complications. And Ayurveda has a lot to say in the field of diabetes and other lifestyle medication, lifestyle management approaches. However, there is a real lack of awareness of what Ayurveda can really do in the space of diseases, lifestyle diseases like diabetes. And so what I wanted in this session to give an overview about what Ayurveda says about diabetes, and also, talk about some of the dietary aspects of what we could make in our lifestyle and diet to, kind of support the medications that are given to manage diabetes. So Charak Samhita is more than 5,000 years old. And there is a very nice and short, sweet shlok in Charak Samhita, which I love to quote all the time to anybody whom I'm talking about diabetes. It says, Asya Sukham Swapna Sukham Dadini Gramyada Kanu Prasaha Payansi Navannapanam Guduvaikritam Cha Prameha Hetu Kafakricha Sarvam. So in a very short sentence and simple 2 lines, they have given the entire causative factors of diabetes and what causes, the primary causes. So Asya Sukham basically means sedentary lifestyles. Then Swapna Sukham. Swapna Sukham means excessive sleeping, but it is more indicative towards sleeping in the afternoon. So like you have a heavy meal with loads of carbohydrates, and then you take a 2-hour nap, that is not definitely advised. So that forms a part of the lifestyle advices that we give to people when they are managing a disease like diabetes. Excessive intake of dairy products. So when we say dadhini, it doesn't refer to curds directly. So it is kind of milk products, but excessive intake is generally advised not to be taken. So we also have to remember this in context of when this shlok was written. This was more than 5,000 years back, when the milk that was available was more of a high fat content milk, especially buffalo milk. So what we today advise people to go for skim milk. And if you're taking curds, better to take it in the form of a buttermilk, where it is diluted. So curds are definitely recommended, but take it with in a diluted form, dilute by buttermilk form with enough spices in it, which is healthier for a diabetic. Then excessive, so about meats also, it is not that Ayurveda discourages meat. It advises certain types of meat which can be taken. So the meat, marine meat, so I have more details about the explanation of each of these words in my next slide. So when we say Gramya Odak Anup Rasaha, we talk about a meat of domestic, aquatic and marshy animals. So by that we say, if you compare, so mutton is, so the lean meats can be taken. So mutton is supposed to be avoided, but you can go for things like chicken. So the recommendation when you're going for meat is to be the active animals, the forest animals meat is more conducive to a diabetic than the meat of animals who are kind of local, like the goat and all. These are generally not advised. Navannapanam is not to be taken. What does Navannapanam mean? It means like, freshly harvested grains, freshly prepared alcoholic drinks. These are to be avoided. But suppose something is like kind of old. So generally you've seen the elderly people when they go to buy rice or any grain, they just kind of look at it like that. And if it is kind of transparent, that is generally not taken. But the old aged grains are preferred. So aged grains are lower, are dehydrated. So they are lower in their starch content in it. So that is preferred. And the new grains have to be avoided. And Gudavekritam. So there is a misconception that jaggery is better. So jaggery is better than sugar in terms of the nutritional aspect of it. Sugar has no nutrients versus jaggery does have some nutritional aspects of it. There are some micronutrients present in jaggery. But that being said, for diabetic, even jaggery is not allowed. So basically jaggery has the same glycemic index as sugar. So it should not be taken. So any kind of Gudavekritam, so anything made of jaggery and sweets made of jaggery is avoided. So this is kind of the basic positive factors of diabetes. And remember, this has been said by Charak Samhita more than 5,000 years ago. And these are just 2 lines. So it'll kind of give you an insight of how much of rich literature we have in our texts in Ayurveda about diabetes. So current scenario. So this is some statistics which most people will be aware of. India has around 77 million people with diabetes. There is a lack of authentic information. So once you get diabetes, people kind of say, okay, I'm doomed now, I'll get all these diseases, these complications. So I have attended a lot of diabetes related sessions delivered by experts. So generally on all these sessions, the focus is on the complications and the problems that diabetes can cause. So the patients generally, there's a sense of fear instilled in patients. So, okay, now if you have diabetes, if you don't do this, if you don't take care of this, if you don't take your medicines properly, you will get diabetic retinopathy, or you will get some peripheral neuropathy, you will lose your limbs. So that kind of fear is instilled, which is very against, like Dr. Tautkari just mentioned, that goes against the positive psychology that we usually talk about. So positive psychology is, don't be fearful about if you've got diabetes. How do you manage it? What should be the next steps? What is the kind of lifestyle you should avoid? How can you manage it better? So there is a 3-pronged approach to managing diabetes: Ahar, Vihar, and Aushadh. So Ahar is, of course, simple Sanskrit of diet. Vihar is your lifestyle. So that includes yoga, that includes what time you should get up, that includes your dinacharya, your ritucharya, what time you should sleep, the interval between your meals. All this is a part of your Vihar. And Aushadh, which is out of scope for this particular session. This session, I will focus only on the Ahar aspect of it. And get everyone to know that instead of going for OTC medicines, over-the-counter medicines, which are somebody's heard from somebody and taking some medicines, better to go for proper personalized Ayurvedic medicine, so that the complete value of Ayurveda is realized. So again, classification of Ayurveda. Ayurveda does not claim that all types of diabetes is curable. So there is a broad category of diseases in Ayurveda called Prameha. And Prameha there are 20 types of Prameha described in Charak Samhita. And these 20 types are classified as 10 types of kapha. So as you know, Ayurveda classifies diseases based on the prakriti of the patient, predominance of the 3 humours or prakriti. And based on that, the treatment is personalized. So 20 types of Prameha, out of which 10 Kaphaj, 6 Pittaj, where there is a predominance of the Pitta dosha, and 4 of Vataj, where there is a predominance of Vata dosha. In general, according to the prognosis also, they have classified as curable, incurable, and manageable. So Sadhya is curable, Asadhya is incurable. And so there are no tall claims that if you've got diabetes, it will be cured. It is clearly classified. Generally, the people which have a Vata predominance are what is called Madhumeha is incurable. Again, according to the etiology, it could be Sahaj Prameha, that is the genetic or juvenile onset type 1 diabetes. And you have Apatya Nimittaj, that is the obese people or people with sedentary habits or who have developed diabetes later in their life. So this is the non-insulin dependent or type 2 diabetes in today's world. And this has a better prognosis, the type 2 diabetes, which can be easily managed or possibly reversed if it's in the early stages with proper diet and medication. So multiple ways in which Prameha is classified. Again, just an overview of how it is caused. So there are 2 primary reasons. It could be either deficiency of insulin. So your pancreas, the beta cells in the pancreas are not secreting sufficient insulin, or insulin resistance. So when we say insulin resistance, it is at a cellular level. So the individual cells in your body are unable to uptake the insulin and process it for the glucose that comes with the food. So basically, the insulin's resistance is more at a cellular level. So these are the 2 primary causes of diabetes. So when managing diabetes, we have to be cognizant of the fact that it cannot be cured in 1 or 2 days. It's a long time effort over a period of 6 months to 1 year when it takes to completely get into levels where it can be managed and reversed. And it is very much associated with other lifestyle disorders. So obesity, metabolic syndromes. You often find people with a high cholesterol also being highly diabetic, hypertension, sensitive people, hypoglycemic. All these are a group of diseases which are very often found together. There are a lot of risk factors. Genetic factors play a wrong role. So generally, there is a strong family history. So type 1 we know is present by birth, or it's always there. But even in families, the diet patterns since childhood are such that they are predisposed to, already there are some mutations in the genes, and they are predisposed towards developing diabetes because of the type of diet they are used to taking since childhood. And in today's life, sedentary lifestyle, we are all sitting and working. So how can we combat that and get to more active lifestyles? Yeah. So without wasting, so some kind of, I've tried to classify all the types of food that we normally take and into cereals, fruits, vegetables, and the snacks, and what could we do with each of these classes of food groups. This is an actual picture of quinoa salad, actually, what you see over here, which is kind of one of the healthy recipes. Yav or barley. Now there is a lot of reference of yav in, so this is one shlok which refers to yav or barley in Ayurveda. So yav is something which is kind of, we have lost we have not been taking. Most families you inquire, most of the patients who come to us, they are not aware of yav being a food product which they can include as a part of their diet. So yav has been extensively talked about in Charak Samhita. It can be taken in multiple forms. The easiest way to incorporate it into your diets is to get it grind, by your regular chakki, and keep yav atta, the flour of atta, the jaw atta, and knead it like with a little bit oil or ghee with normal warm water, and make chapatis out of it. In fact, I have brought, most of you may be aware, but just the yav seeds, I have few of it. Another way to consume this yav is to roast it. If you roast it and use it, it has a still lower glycemic index. Of all the cereals you see over here listed, yav has a glycemic index of around 25 to 28, which is the lowest. If you compare it with other cereals, which have almost, in fact, wheat goes up to a glycemic index of 70, 72, even the millets, which are, a lot of people are moving to a millet-based diet. Millets are also within the range of 50 to 60. So yav or jav is a very good substitute. And if you can make chapatis or rotis out of it, this can easily be a substitute for regular consumption in your food. Second group of cereals that I would like to touch upon is the millets. So millets are called as trindhanya in Ayurveda. So millets have a glycemic index of between 50 to 60, and they are gluten free. Basically, gluten is a protein which sometimes becomes heavy for diabetics to digest, and a lot of people are known to be gluten allergic. There are at least 10 varieties of millets available all over India. Say in Maharashtra, you have this barai or bhagar, it is called. So that is the little millet. In the south, you have kodo millet. Then we have jawar, bajri, which is all foxtail millet, pearl millet. These are all different varieties of millets. So for example, if you know bhagar or the little millet, it is a good idea to soak it and then cook it. After millets, a little bit about dalia or wheat. Wheat is what we make our regular atta. So wheat, the way we get it, the ready-made wheat that we get, the kernel of the wheat is low glycemic index. But what we generally get, the ready-made Ashirwad, so it removes quite the bran out of it, and then that is ground. So it is better to use dalia, which has a glycemic index between 60s, whereas the actual Ashirwad atta that you get will go up to 70. So wheat, which is naturally ground by the regular chakki, is a better choice. Again, rice, there are different varieties of rice that is used all over India. What we need to avoid is the sticky rice, which is available in, a lot of these Thai and Chinese. Sticky rice has a higher glycemic index. But basmati rice is the one, especially old grain basmati rice, has a very low glycemic index of around 50. So it comes around the medium to low glycemic index. And in Kerala, you see this, we hear a lot of Malayalis having this red rice or shashtik rice. So this is also a good quality of rice, which can be replaced with the regular rice that we are taking. Now quinoa, so this salad bowl is made of quinoa, this small type of granules. In fact, I have it in my fridge, but I haven't brought. I forgot to bring. This is not a cereal. It is the seed of a plant, but this can be kind of substituted as a cereal also and cooked accordingly. So this is all about the cereals. Then a bit of the fruits. Now, amla is something which can be consumed generously. All the vitamin C rich fruits. So oranges, mosambi, they should all rich in vitamin C, and they should be supplemented generously in your diet. Papaya, make it a habit to include at least one bowl of papaya in the ripe papaya in our diet for all diabetics. Apple, you can have about 1 apple a day. Pomegranates again improves insulin sensitivity, and you should have it entire with the seed. Pomegranate also, there are a lot of medicines also made in Ayurveda, Avleha, but the Dadim Avleha is available. That is generally not recommended for diabetics, but pomegranate as a fruit should be taken in large quantities whenever possible. Papaya is one thing which we recommend generally to take every day, because it kind of helps to improve the hepatic function, also the liver functions, to improve the enzyme secretions in your body. Vegetables. So while having any vegetable, all vegetables are recommended, especially the bitter ones. So Karela, Methi, all kinds of gourds, the Dudhi, snake gourd, bitter gourd, the beans, all kinds of leafy vegetables, Methi vegetables, try to include at least 2 to 3 days in a week. And while planning any meal, what we generally recommend, fill half your plate with vegetables. You can have 1/4 with proteins or dals and another 1/4 with any cereal. So all vegetables are good. There are some vegetables like pumpkin and all, which are slightly on the higher glycemic index, but it can be taken in moderation. Then snacks. So we all have, instead of gorging on processed food, nuts and dry fruits make a good snack. So all kinds of dry fruits are good. Some of the dry fruits, what I usually advise my patients is pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds. You can make a mix and all these dry fruits. Flax seeds also. Flax seeds are very tiny. Flax seeds, you can roast it and have it. So these kind of things, you can kind of make a mix of it and keep it around you. And this can be snacked on. Sprouts are good. Whole green gram, whole horse gram. Other snacks is you can make upmas out of millets. You can have chila, moong chila, or besan chila, besan dal, besan, moong dal, gram flour. All these are good dietary supplements. Smoothies are another quick fix diet. Like you can just blend carrots, tomatoes, apples, pomegranates, whatever, easily blendable things. Put a little bit of curd, some flax seeds, some dry fruits, and some black salt in it, some jeera, some ajwain, and have a smoothie. So these smoothies are very filling. You have 1 glass of it. That is, it's almost equivalent to a meal and meets all your nutritional requirements as well. Then mix fruits anytime for having snacks. So these are all the recommended fruits. So overall, what are the principles of managing your diet is you should have a warm diet, because prameha or diabetes is a disease which has aggravated kapha dosha. So a warm diet helps to ease the cough, normalize the vata, and then also stimulate the pitta so that it intensifies your digestion. We want in a diabetic that all your digestion levels are increased.
Dietary requirement.
Yeah, so your pitta, if the more your pitta is a little bit aggravated, so it helps to digest and assimilate all the glucose, excess glucose that you have consumed. So whole grain flours, like we spoke in our previous slide, whole grain flours are always better options. Buckwheat flour is that singhade kata that we talk about. Then also, there's also something called puttu kata, which you get in the north. So all these attas are very good for the management of diabetes. Oil. So in the oil section, there are 4 types of oil, which has been mentioned in Charak Samhita. Mustard oil, the other 3 oils, they have spoken about flaxseed oil, which is not available these days. So in today's context, mustard oil is definitely a preferable oil for cooking for all diabetes. So basically, you choose low glycemic index food. Before you're making a diet choice, look up the glycemic index of the food. What is glycemic index? It's just a measure. So glycemic index is a value between 0 to 100. And 100 is like arbitrarily the value of glucose. The glycemic index of glucose has been fixed as 100. And all the other foods are rated as between 0 to, so anything above 69 and 70 is a high glycemic index food. Anything between 45 to 59 kind of medium, 50 to 59 is medium, and below 45 is considered to be a low glycemic index food. So low glycemic food index, you choose your glycemic index wisely, the foods that you are, and plan your diet accordingly. Use spices generously. So haldi, dhania, jeera, methi, all cinnamon, all these are preferable food. Buttermilk, like I mentioned earlier, use buttermilk and spice it up. Put adrak in buttermilk, jeera. Some lean meat is freshwater fish occasionally can be had. Chicken can be had. This is a list of herbs I've put together. I'll quickly walk through a list of 10 to 12 herbs which are easily available around us and give you a brief. Aula, the more said about it is, so aula, there is a lot of mention about aula. Now I have prepared a glass of aula juice following these instructions. So basically I just chopped and put it on a blender and added 1/4 teaspoon of fresh haldi in it, some lemon juice, some curry leaves, fresh curry leaves, a pinch of black salt and cumin powder, and blended and just strained it. So, and there is sufficient quantity of water to make a glass full. So this glass has been made with 5 aulas. So this tastes good and can be a good drink even at home. Other easy ways, if somebody doesn't want to have an entire full glass full, another easy ways to consume is just grate it and squeeze the juice out of your hands and have 5-6. So 1 aula gives you almost 600 milligrams of vitamin C or ascorbic acid. So people have been taking 2 tablets of vitamin C, and now with the pandemic in rise, there have been recommendations that you should take more of vitamin C. So rather than taking tablets, it is always recommended to take whatever is naturally available within the homes. I know most of you would probably be knowing these facts, but sometimes just reiterating them and making and just reminding ourselves about these helps us to kind of implement these in our daily lives. Again, tej patta, this is all there. We use it in our spices and we take it out and throw it aside when we are making pulaus and all that, but we just use it for the flavor. A better way to use tej patta is probably grind it and then use it in our pulao and other mixes so that it doesn't get thrown away in the side. And use the bay leaf powder. So other options is you can make tea out of it, just 3 to 4 leaves, and even add some dalchini powder. You can add it to your regular tea also as a spice with all these chai masalas and all. Make tea with the bay leaf. And this is known to have a good effect on controlling your sugars, and 1 to 3 grams on a daily basis for 30 days has shown to reduce serum glucose and cholesterol. And there are published reports on both tej patta and dalchini. Jamun. Now, this is not, so whenever the seasonal of jamun is there, all diabetics are advised to consume jamuns, raw jamun. When all these seasonal fruits and vegetables, make the most of it when they are seasonally available. You can also make jamun smoothie, if the best way is, of course, to take it, to just have it, but sometimes some people are not, don't want to take it. So you can always, put a pinch of pepper in it, add some honey, some black salt, some lemon, and serve it in tall glasses so it looks good. The seeds of jamun also, instead of throwing it away, just dry it up. It takes quite some time to dry it up. You have to clean it and then, break it and then leave it again for drying for a few more days. You can powder it. It is a little hard to powder in at home in mixie, but you'll have to kind of crush it with a khalbatta and then powder it in the mixie. So both the fruit and the seed both are helpful in the management of diabetes. This is a plant. In fact, today morning I spoke to Vijay madam and Sri Rupa madam and got it from USA. Guruchi plant. You can easily grow it in your garden. It grows very easily. Tinospora cordifolia. The stem is.
Can you please hold it more near towards your camera so that it's visible? Yeah. That's better. Yeah. Even I think you were trying to show the avla part. So at that level, if you can hold your glass, then everybody.
Okay. So here's the avla glass. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is the Guruchi leaf which I got from the USA, and it's a garden, and it's a really well maintained, nice garden that we have. Right. It's just across my house. So Guduchi, the stem is more effective. This stem is used for, it's used as a powder, it is used as a decoction, and it's a stem and aerial roots in a dosage of 3 to 6 grams. So most of these drugs are not given as single herbs. They are used in combination with other medicines. So it is a good idea for those of you who love gardening. It's a good idea to have it in your homes and pots, because this grows very easily. So yeah. And there are, in fact, certain combinations called Amrit Mehari Churna also, which is advised to many patients, which is a combination of Guduchi and some other herbs used for the management of diabetes. Now, this is a vegetable, kundru, which most of us, so this is known ivy gourd or kundru or tendli or bimbika in Sanskrit. It grows in all kinds of soil. It can be a fresh leaf juice can also be taken in a dose of 15 ml. It grows very easily in all types of soil, and include the cooked vegetable in your diet, regular consumption. So obviously nobody will be having this vegetable every day, but including this as a part of your diet alternately, with maybe some days you have karela, some days you have this vegetable, it definitely helps in bringing down your sugars over a period of time. Haldi. So here's what I do with haldi, if you can see. So this is a simple pickle of haldi, which I usually stock and keep for the entire year and use it as a side dish during meals. So fresh haldi, you can just cut into pieces, and this is a very simple to make. Use even amba haldi, that it's called mango ginger or amba haldi in our local markets, amba haldi in Marathi. Squeeze some lemon juice into it, fill it up to the brim, the lemon juice. You can even include a few fresh chili for the taste, and put some salt. It usually stays long, and for sometimes you keep it in the sun for a few days. This is a good recipe and can be used as a side dish and a pickle. Haldi is usually advised. So we are using haldi in our diet, but additionally, having it in small doses so daily dosage of haldi is around 500 to 2000. So there have been reports that excess haldi has also caused problems. So although it's a part of our diet, we can definitely supplement extra haldi with these. So the the active principles in haldi is curcuminase. So what we have in our regular diet, we don't get a sufficient dose. So additional curcuminase are always helpful. Karela needs no introduction. Fresh juice of the leaves, the vegetable included in your diet as much as you can. The vegetable, a lot of people are crushing it and making juice of it. So that adds to the additional work. But use it in your diet as a general vegetable. Just cook it up. That's the easiest way to use it. And sometimes if it's growing in your garden, in Mumbai, a lot of people grow it. So you can, if the leaves are kind of excess of leaves, you can just crush and make juice of the leaves and have that also occasionally. Now this is Costus ignis. This is not Ayurvedic plant, but this is a Brazilian plant. And there is a lot of reference these days and a lot of studies done on this plant. I found a lot of this growing in the USA campus also. This is a plant native to Brazil. The leaves of this are slightly sour in taste and can be taken raw. 1 to 2 leaves can be taken daily. It's quite, I mean, even if you take it directly, it is quite nice to taste. It doesn't have any bitter aftertaste. It's sour, and this can be taken occasionally with your diet. So this is an interesting plant. Most of you have seen this. The leaves and the roots are used, fine powder, dried and used. This plant has some active principles called vincristine and vinblastine. The Madagascar periwinkle plant this is a drug which has been used for treatment of cancer also. Although we are in an Ayurvedic form, the whole drug is used, and there has been extensive research done on this plant. And this is the active principle of this is synthetically prepared in labs and marketed as a drug in the pharma industry. So vincristine, vinblastine is derived from this plant. And this grows everywhere, all around our houses. It's very easy to grow. This is not a Ayurvedic plant, but it is herbal nevertheless. So I wanted to touch upon this. So stevia is a South African shrub, and nowadays it's being used a lot as a substitute for sugar. It is very easily available in Amazon and all stores. So for most diabetics, keeping your sugar control and having occasional sweets is, I mean, you always want to have. So this is a good substitute for sugar. Instead of going for the synthetic sugars and, you know, those other packed sugars that are chemical, this is a better option. It is also available in Amazon in the form of white granules, which can be used as a substitute for the regular sugar and jaggery. It can be grown in your gardens as plants. It grows in small tubs also. So stevia is a dry leaf extract. It's available at the local chemists also, as in all online stores. And for sweets, while making sweets, it can be used as a substitute. It does have a slightly different taste, but over time you get used to it. Kadi patta. So kadi patta, dry kadi patta is very beneficial. You can make chutneys out of this. This is known to reduce sugars and has an impact on the insulin secretions also. So 1 to 2 grams can be taken regularly, or just substitute it in your diet. So when you're eating, just don't, people that have the habit of leaving the curry leaves and putting them aside, just chew them up while eating your regular food. You can make fresh curry leaf chutneys with peanuts and use in all chutneys and as a side dish. So use this generously. This plant is also something I have over here. Most of you have seen this. So while making this, you have to be sure that you scrape off the sides, the thorny part of it, and use only the inside gel of it. So there's a clear gel that comes out of the inside of this plant. So this can be blended, the colorless gel, leave out all the leaf green part of it and use only the gel. You can make a sharbat out of this with lemon juice. Just use 1 teaspoon of the gel, mix it in a blender with the water, and add a teaspoon of lemon and some honey for taste. And this also can be easily grown in pots and gardens. So this is 2 case studies I had, and I thought I will share. So both these patients, since the timelines are different, I have put them up together. So this is the fasting sugar of a patient who is still currently under treatment, has come from June to this is September. Starting from June, when we started the treatment, it was around 170, and he was taking 3 tablets of metformin. So from somewhere around July, we reduced the dosage of metformin, and we have come down to, from 3, we have come down to 1 tablet. And of course, there's a rigorous follow-up on the diet, or there's a rigorous follow-up on the medicines. So there is no shortage of formulations in Ayurveda, which is a very personalized treatment on the medicines that can be used. And currently, the latest blood sugar has come down to 132. So remember, the dosage of metformin has also been reduced over a period of time. But this requires a lot of compliance from the patients themselves who want to, there has to be a sufficient interest and control from the patient side to follow the diet regimens. It doesn't mean that you have to give up everything, but there is always this glycemic index and having the proper, so like a lot of people, if I'm having a sweet, what else do I cut on? So if you're having 1 sweet, you have to cut down maybe on 2 chapatis for your dinner. And that's how you have to maintain your exchange list in your diet. So this patient has completely drug-free. It's come down to 127 over a period of 2 to 3 years, but it is possible. Yeah, so that's all I had. I hope I did not go overboard. I don't know. Did I? I lost track of time. Thank you.
Can you see the screen and hear me properly?
Yes,
Thank you so much, Smita. Thank you for the lovely introduction. See, these are changing times, and we designers have to keep up with the times. You know, the urban designers, educational institutions for the challenged, and institutions dealing with children. Because today there is so much of addiction going on, addiction to gadgets, addiction to videos, substance abuse also has increased. Another thing, you know, which is a modern day malady is aging. A large portion of the Indian population is growing old. Though we have a very large young children and young youth in our country, there is also aging, which leads to loneliness and sometimes dementia. And as Joyati was talking about diabetes, and you know, people with diabetes have got, you know, an inclination to have depression 2 or 3 times higher than the rest. There is also something called, you know, diabetes distress. The very fact that you're taking care of your diabetes, you know, controlling your diet, taking your medications, you know, that also leads to depression and anxiety. And you must have heard of the eating disorders. The most famous Princess Diana, you know, she had this problem with eating. You know, every day she would eat and then throw up. And obesity is increasing rapidly among young children. And another thing is everybody is obsessed with the 0 figure. You know, you want to be slim and not doing well in studies, or not looking good, or not slim. You know, all these are leading to anxieties, tensions, and depression. And another thing I would like to touch upon, which relates very much with gardening, is hidden hunger. Dr. Swaminathan, the father of Indian agricultural revolution, the Green Revolution, he said that Indian children, irrespective of the background they come from, you know, rich or poor, suffer from hidden hunger. Hidden hunger is nothing but micronutrient deficiency. So we will carry on. So these are all the modern lifestyle problems, you know, modern day maladies, and how do we manage them with gardening? Horticulture therapy, as all of you know, is a very, very ancient technique. In fact, in ancient Egypt, the royalty, heavy lies the head that wears the crown. The royalty, people in high places are very distressed, you know, have a lot of stress on them, on how to carry on and how to take care of so many people. So the physicians then advise the royalty to walk in their gardens. You know, at the bottom right, you can see Cleopatra. She is out in her garden, and she would use this plant Nirgudi, also known as Cleopatra's bath salts, to relax. She would put it in hot water, and she would sit in the water, in the tub, and absorb all the goodness of the Nirgudi. And we have a very famous book called Manasollasa. Manas is mind and Ullasa is joy. So joy of the mind, written by a king from medieval Karnataka. He talks about, you know, gardens, water features, mounds, and biodiversity, which helps to make you happy. I will also be touching upon different theories, you know, landscaping theories and psychological theories, which connect plants and nature to human well-being. And one of the things he recommends is fragrance. He says fragrance, that is why we sprinkle rose water when people enter our homes during weddings. And he also recommends aromatic beverages, soaking of champa flower in water. So the water infused with champa flower is very refreshing, and it transports you into a different world. Now, the Chinese also used horticulture therapy. There is a very famous saying in China, which says, if you want to be happy for a day, get married. If you want to be happy for a month, if you want to be happy for a day, get drunk. If you want to be happy for a month, get married. If you want to be happy forever, do gardening. You can see Saif Ali Khan with his first wife. He finally divorced her and remarried. Then you can see Sachin Tendulkar celebrating the winning of the World Cup with champagne. But what happens when he comes back and plays another game? If the Indian team does not win against Pakistan, then rotten eggs and tomatoes await them. You see, Michelle Obama, she came from a very, ordinary family, and her parents encouraged her to be with plants and garden. And she continued this as the first lady of America. So that is why, in spite of all the problems she had, she was still remained happy. As I was talking to you about malnutrition, there are over 7,000 to 8,000 food species, known food species available, plants available across the world. But we eat only about 20 of them all over the world. It's tomatoes, onions, potatoes, cauliflower, cabbage, etc. All the others we have forgotten. India has a rich tradition of wild edibles, many leafy vegetables which come during monsoon, which come during winter. And we have our Indian gourds, which are packed with nutrients. Now we should increase. When children start growing or watch others growing, they get curious and their diet, increases. They start eating more vegetables. We have a small terrace over here in my daughter's place. So we grow only one vegetable in one pot. We had pumpkins, we had cucumber, and we had bhendi. And all these vegetables we give my little grandson who's 10 months old. So he has now already started eating a variety of vegetables. And it's a joy growing. We grew a cucumber and it looked long like a cucumber, and then it developed stripes. Then everybody said, this can't be a cucumber, this must be a watermelon. So we researched, finding out what is this watermelon, which is oval in shape, long in shape. And finally, it became a lovely golden color and turned out to be the Madras cucumber. We relished it, we cooked it with dal and enjoyed it. Microgreens, this is the superfood of the 21st century. In India, we've always used sprouts. And we have used even microgreens, especially methi is very popular with the Gujarati community. And you can find it, being sold. But it is so easy to make it, to grow them at home. You can grow them with soil or without soil. Simply take methi seeds and soak 1/3 cup of methi seeds in 1 cup of water, but change the water every day. And then spread it on a tray, a very shallow tray, the takeaways which you get when you order food from outside, and lightly spray it, cover it with a thin cloth. You can use your hanky, and then rinse this cloth daily so that you don't have any fungus, and water it lightly. And then soon, in about 10 to 15 days, you will have methi growing, which you can consume in Western food like burgers and salads, or have your own raitas and sabzis, or cook it with dal. Children today spend almost 99% of their time indoors. During before the pandemic, they would, spend a couple of, maybe an hour or two outside playing. Today, even that has stopped. And indoor air is much more polluted than outdoor air. So NASA, did a lot of research when they sent their satellite. They wanted to, test that what would be good for the astronauts, what would be healthy. So they experimented with many plants which are grown in the rainforest, like money plant, spider plant, ficus, which we can easily grow at home. These absorb toxins. Inside the house, you have paints, you have dust, you have varnish, you have the refrigerators giving out pollutants, computers. So these are good, and children would love to watch them and grow them. Some of them are very hardy to grow. Depression, it's more than just a bad mood. When someone is depressed, you say he's in a bad mood. No, it is a sickness. It is a disease, which needs to be treated. If you do not treat depression, then it leads to something else. And when you are amidst, horticulture therapy, when you are amidst greenery, or you're watching a picture, which has got nature, you feel your blood pressure comes down and you feel much more at ease. You know, today we're filled with tension. Tension is one word which we Indians, you know, especially we Mumbaikars, can pronounce much better than the Britishers. I think today across India or across the world, they can pronounce it so well. I remember, you know, once I was a little, you know, upset because my daughter was not studying. And then my maid said, "Bhai, काय झालं? तुम्हाला लय tension आहे." I said, "Yes, my daughter is not studying. She's got her 12th board exams coming up." And then, you know, another day, I saw my maid absolutely dull and, you know, upset. I said, "Bhai, काय झालं?" She says, "काय सांगू बाई तुम्हाला? माझा नवरा लय पितोय." And we have no money to eat because of his drinking. So, and you also have diabetic distress, and children and teens have got very negative self-esteem. And these things, when you are working with plants, when you're looking at plants, when you're out in the nature, your brain, your thinking moves away from what you have been experiencing before, and you feel much better. Your mood improves. Exercise. You know, exercise is very important for diabetics, for people with cardiovascular problems. Doctors recommend exercise. For obesity. But if you tell someone, you know, chalo, exercise karo, go to the gym, you know, people get put off. But when they work in the garden, they don't realize that this is exercise, because it is fun and it is joyous. And there are many things which you can do. So avoid having mechanized implements like electric lawn mowers. Mow your lawn if you have. Prune your plants with ordinary secateurs and cutters. Water them. And when you're moving from one place to another, you're walking and you're spending your energy and you are getting exercise. You know, a sedentary lifestyle is known to be a major risk factor for cardiovascular diseases. So when you're gardening, you are expending your energy and you are working. You know, it's very common. Many people today, you know, face this inability to go to bed. They say, we just can't sleep because you have an overdose of information. You know, you're working on your IT work or you're working in your other stress and tension. And even elderly people, they find it difficult to sleep. But when you do gardening, when you're out in the greenery, you know, the very look at a green thing, it lowers your blood pressure and it reduces stress and lowers your anxiety and also gives you the much needed exercise. You know, when you're tired, you will automatically go to bed. And I was talking about Manasollas, where, you know, fragrant beverages were recommended. There are two beverages, you know, which help to induce sleep. You know, you get a little sleepy. One is Mogra, the other is Krishna Kamal or passion flower. These are very, very simple to make. Mogra is very, very popular sharbat in Persia, and the Sindhis use it a lot. It's very simple. You have to take these fresh flowers and boil it in water, or just simply put it in hot water overnight, and next day strain it and add any honey or jaggery or sugar and fresh lime. You can drink it hot or you can drink it cold, and both are effective and very delicious. You can see these three beautiful ladies over here. You know, they use this technique of horticulture therapy when they invite the new bride into their homes. You know, they make these sweet puris, and in the sweet puris, they make tiny holes and insert buds of mogra. And the next day morning, they give this sweet puris to the young bride. Remember, a bride those days would come from distant places, probably speaking a different language, probably, you know, who doesn't know anybody in the new home. And she's very stressed up and anxious and in a new home. But when she opens, you know, when she eats this puri, when she breaks it, all the buds have turned to flowers, and there is beautiful aroma and fragrance which greet the young bride. Now, I think Madhu was talking about hormones. There are many hormones, when you're gardening, which are released. One is serotonin. There is a bacteria in the soil which releases serotonin, which is a mood stabilizer. This keeps depression at bay and makes you joyful. We should not prevent our children, stop our children from playing with mud. It's been in our country for generations, children have been playing with mud, but today we call it dirt and we say don't touch it. But when they touch the matti, all the serotonin which is released by this bacteria is absorbed by the skin and is breathed in, and it helps to keep depression at bay. Also, when you are have a harvest, if you've grown something, maybe large pumpkins or bhendi, whatever you've grown, or flowers in your garden, you feel rewarded. And when you feel a reward, there is dopamine which is released, especially when you have a very pleasurable experience. Then there is oxytocin, also known as the love hormone. During stimulating experiences, like maybe there is a pond and you dangle your feet in the water, the cool water of the pond, or when children are playing with a hose pipe and they're sprinkling water on each other, it's a very exhilarating experience. And at that time, oxytocin is released. And endorphin, when you're working, when you're exercising in the garden, when you're doing the garden chores, endorphin is released, and this helps as a painkiller. So when we, pain is something which is quite common in the elderly. So when you're out in the garden and you're working, when endorphin is released, it acts like a painkiller. Yeah, don't underestimate the power of goosebumps. If you see the extreme right bottom picture, there is a stone ledge. It is jutting out, and below it, you can see the mountains and mist, and there is nothing. It's a sheer drop. This is in the Blue Mountains in Sydney. And when the guide told me, you can go there, I was a little apprehensive. So I said, I will not sit. I lay down flat there and peep from the edge down. It was an exhilarating experience and awesome. And I can, even today, I get goosebumps, when I think of that experience. But that, made my mind completely void. It was completely shunyata, So there was no stress, no tension, no thinking. So these are experiences, as a child, we would see wonder, looking at, I was taking my grandson out today and there was a little fly, and the fly kept moving from my one hand to the other and from on my leg, and the little child kept on watching and trying to catch the fly. See, this is wonder. So, but how do you create wonder in your gardens? Grow some novelties like the air plants. These air plants do not need a container, do not need matti. You can just hang them by the thread and spray water, they will survive. And people are fascinated. How is it growing? Matti nahi hai, kuch nahi hai, kundi nahi hai. Grow carnivorous plants, which, when you see a little fly or mosquito coming, how it will shut and how it will create some suspense. What is going to happen? It spark interest by having a goldfish bowl or a small aquarium in the house, or grow the dragon fruit, which is so fascinating. It comes on a cactus-like plant. So when you have this interest and novelty and suspense in your garden, you create a sense of wonder. We are losing the sense of wonder. We need to get it back into our lives. This is in Johannesburg in South Africa. I happened to go to their museum, Apartheid Museum. It was an awesome, horrible experience, horrible, because right in the beginning, they had two doors. According to your ticket, you were either a white or you were a black, and you had to enter through the doors. And the minute you entered, you could see the horrific things done to the black people and the Indians by the white people of South Africa. It was horrible, horrible. and my mind was in a turmoil. And when I stepped out of this museum, there was this garden specially created with a lot of grasses. Remember grasses, there's a theory called the prospect refuge theory, which says, all of us originated from Africa, where there were a lot of grasses, savannas. That is why when we look at grass, we feel happy and content. That is why people grow lawns, which are very difficult to maintain and very expensive too. So when I came out into this garden and I sat down, I was restored. So this was a restorative garden, a tranquil place. Nature is my psychiatrist. Stress reduction theory, they say when you are looking at nature, a beautiful waterfall, the sound of the waterfall and the beauty of how it is flowing and falling from great heights, it makes you feel good and it benefits your mental and physical health. How do you make a tranquil garden? I would like to give you some design tips. That's what I've been doing all along. So when you're creating a tranquil garden, I've made these gardens for ashrams. There's an ashram in Shivaji Park, which I have created. We try to use soothing colors. Green is soothing, light blue is soothing, white is soothing, light pink is soothing. And when you introduce these light colors in your landscape, then the feeling of, quietness, the feeling of calm, sets in you, and you feel much better, and your anxiety and stress diminishes, the levels diminish. This is the attention restoration theory. If you go to many offices, we're all busy with our laptops and desktops and all our other gadgets. And this leads to a fatigue, mental fatigue and also physical fatigue. So when you move your eyes away from the laptop and look at some plants, then there is some relief to the eye and relief to the mind. That is why in offices, you have lots of plants. They say even at home also, wherever you have a computer or laptop, keep a plant near. And there are many studies which say that children, especially girls, who have windows overlooking greenery, do much better academically. This is Parsi General Hospital. I had made a garden for the senior citizens. They were all Parsis. And we use certain principles because now this is a contemporary need. That is why we see so many Nana Nani gardens coming up in the cities. Now this garden was designed with the figure of 8 pathway. Figure of 8 pathway allows you to come back to the same spot. You need not take the whole, there are 2 circles. So you need not go all over. You can just take a 1 circle and come back, and you can never get lost, because the feeling of getting lost is very, very high in seniors, especially those suffering from dementia. And then you need a lot of fragrance and not overwhelming fragrance and bold leaves. If you can look here, you can see the leaves are very large, because as we grow older, our visibility decreases. So something bold, bright colors or large, bold leaves, attract your attention. Now, this is a dementia-friendly garden. How do you create a dementia-friendly garden? Because dementia and Alzheimer's are on the rise. One thing is we are living longer. Previously people would, pass away in their 60s, but today we are living on to 70s, 80s, and 90s. So we need special care and special assistance. So here you have raised flower beds. For the elders, it's very difficult to look down or touch some plant. But if it is at the level of your wheelchair or when you're standing, then you can admire. There should be fragrance and bold colors. Previously we used to use pink for girls' rooms and blue for boys' rooms. But now the trend has changed. We use the bright, brilliant daffodil yellow. Because that is what attracts attention. And you also need shade. I had once designed one garden for someone, with elderly people, and the one gentleman had dementia and he tried to escape. So it is very essential, and I learned my lesson. So you have to have large boundary walls, but you can cover the boundary walls with nice foliage and plants to make it attractive, and shade and sitting, because you get tired, you need a place to sit. And once again, the figure 8 pathway, because it makes you feel safe. This is one of the hospitals called the Seven Hill Hospital in Mumbai, which we designed. And there they had about 24 atriums. There are a lot of research which has been done, especially there's one study done on patients who had recovered from gallbladder surgery. They said, they had 2 sets of patients. One, patients were overlooking greenery, and in the other room, they were not overlooking, they were overlooking a blank wall. And they had the same surgeon, they had the same nursing facilities, but they found that the patients who were overlooking greenery had very few complications and were really discharged faster. So here you can walk, it's wheelchair accessible, people can walk around, people can go on crutches, or they can have an attendant, and you can enjoy the nature. Therapeutic windows, I was talking about hospital patients, gallbladder patients who could overlook greenery. In China, they have a very nice concept. They have windows, beautifully designed windows. Some are like fruit, some are hexagonal, some are rectangular, different shapes. And people indoors, many of the women were not allowed to go out, but they could enjoy the beauty from with it. Each one depicted a beautiful scenery. So you can see in this hexagonal window how they could see a beautiful scenery. This is another hospital in Khar, by Hinduja's boutique hospital, where we made a terrace garden. And in the terrace garden, we had a lot of birds and butterflies and small mammals like squirrels coming in. And this is what is biophilia hypothesis. All human beings love life, love all living creatures. And when you see other living creatures, it makes you happy and it gives you a sense of well-being. Even the windows, we had plants. See, gardens that attract birds and butterflies. So when you plant Ixora, which is in bunches, it has a lot of nectar. So you have a lot of birds like the sunbirds and butterflies coming to it. If you have ficus trees or trees with berries, once again, you attract a lot of birds. And the sunflower attracts a lot of bumblebees and honeybees because of the pollen and nectar in it. Vocational program is often a part of horticulture therapy, because especially when children have some disabilities, this is one job which will keep them happy, mentally happy, and also they will be trained to be useful, trained to do something. So we have the skills and ability school where Manik also worked. Manik Gade is here. She also worked, and she also trained the children how to take care of plants in offices. So the students were trained in indoor plants and how to take care of them, and it gave them an opportunity for employment. This is another school, Paraplegic Foundation in Airoli. I was working there and I suddenly thought, why not train 5 students, a team of students for the National Science Congress? So we started working. It was very difficult because some of them couldn't walk, some couldn't talk, they had mixed disabilities. But anyway, they were talking on medicinal plants. They did some research, they made some preparations, and then they went to the local level, that is New Bombay level. Then they went to Thana, they won there. They went to Pune, and then finally they were selected to go to Goa for the finals. And there was an amazing change in the children. The way they walked, first they used to be stooping. I mean, they didn't bother about their appearance. But as they went level by level up, there was a dramatic change in them. They started dressing well, they started sitting straight, standing straight. And the best of all, they made a fantastic presentation, all 5 of them, in front of a panel of judges from across India. Of course, they did not win the thing, but they managed to go to the topmost position. So this is possible, when you allow children, give them care and design places. It's not enough to have a good therapist. It is also important that you design the garden to suit each condition. This is in Haji Ali. It is attached to the Children's Hospital in Haji Ali. It's a center for a city academy for special children. And here they had gardening as part of the school curriculum. SSC board, I think till 2 years back, had a paper in gardening. And we were very lucky. The photo on the right shows the Wellington Club, which was opposite to in Haji Ali. And they gave access to these children, to come there and work. And the gardeners there and the horticulturists also helped in teaching the children how to do grafting, air layering, different techniques, and identification of plants. And the children blossomed. And I was surprised, that these children topped in the exams, because there were other able-bodied children, but not only able-bodied, able-minded children. And these children topped. There was this one boy, when I was teaching there, I think he had cerebral palsy and he was severely handicapped. He couldn't walk. He had crutches, and I couldn't even understand what he was saying. One day he patted me, and then I looked at him and he tried to tell me something I couldn't follow. And everybody, the whole class, started laughing because all of them could follow him. And I said, "What is he saying?" So they said, he was telling me, "You please don't talk in Hindi. Only talk in Marathi and English because your Hindi is atrocious." And this was a Parsi boy. I mean, he became bold and he could, tell this. And his parents said there was a lot of change in the boy, because he used to also have field trips. We would go to the Malabar Hills, Hanging Gardens, we'd go to the zoo. This was part of the curriculum. This is very interesting. I worked with a shelter home, so that we can provide vocational employment, for the women there. See, the women there were not criminals, but they were booked they were not, convicted, but they were booked and they had to go to court very often. And they had little children, many of them had children who had to stay with them, inside these things. And they were very, desperate women. There was this woman, from who ran away from Calcutta, or I think rural West Bengal. And why did she run away? She wanted to marry Shah Rukh Khan. And we tried to tell her, that Shah Rukh Khan is not going to marry you. I mean, how can he's already married? The only thing she agreed to do in the garden was to grow flowers so that she could send a bouquet to Shah Rukh Khan. And that was how slowly she developed an interest in plants. But believe me, she refused to touch anything else except flowers. So these are rehabilitative reforms. At IFSA, we have a learning garden and we have several sections. I'm not going to talk of all of them, but I'm going to talk about the fragrance section. And fragrance, aroma, these are for health and wellness. You can make essences out of them. You have to, steep some flowers in rice bran or sesame oil, keep it for overnight, strain it, and then that fragrance of the flower is infused into the oil, which you can, apply yourself, and it makes you feel good. And also many, we have Night Queen over there, we have Dinka Raja, we have Kamini, we have many flowers over there. But I would like to tell you, memory what happens is fragrance restores memories. That is why when you are making a garden for the dementia, for those suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's, it is necessary to introduce fragrant flowers. Because when you smell the fragrance of the mogras, your mind takes you back to your young age when you had used these flowers or you've smelled those flowers. I remember, I met somebody in the village who would tie a mogra, garland on his wrist. And I asked him, why are you doing this? He said, no, I smell it and it induces good sleep. You can use, we have a lot of flowers which we throw. We use it for Bhagwan, for Ganesha. We throw. Instead of throwing, you can just dry it and then wrap it, like a bundle of flowers. You get bouquets, you put it upside down and you dry it, and then you tie it with twine, or you can even put a bay leaf and then tie it. And then like agarbatti, you can add a few drops of essence, floral essence like jasmine or rose essence or lavender. And when you burn it and you shake it, you don't want it to burn. Like agarbatti, you shake so that it only smolders and the lovely fragrance spreads all over. Even flowers dry, you can dry them and put it in, we have these incense holders with a handle. You can put it inside and burn it. And that also gives you a lot of fragrance. But you must add 1 or 2 drops of floral essence. Spastic Society. There is a Spastic Society started by Mithi Alur, who had a daughter who was spastic. So she set up these institutes all over. And in Chembur, they have this vocational guidance center where they teach children how to do it. And I was working there one day. And if you see in the bottom right, there's a black container. This is a container to grow seeds. It's a seed tray, seedling tray. So I was trying to show these little children how to put seeds. And I failed miserably because the child would not release the seed. The seed would be in his hand. So I said, okay, let me also relax. So I moved on to the next table. And after about 5-7 minutes, I came back. I was surprised. He had put a seed in every box. It was, I think, a 12 container tray. And I'm surprised. And next to him, there was another girl, also a spastic. And she had taught him how to do it. She says, just take the seed and drop the bomb. Of course, it's horrifying to call the seed a bomb. But then, he had done that. Every tray had a seed in it. So it's important that children work together. Bonding takes place and they learn from each other. What I could not teach, I struggled for 10-15 minutes and moved on. This little child was as challenged as this boy managed to tell him. All she said was drop a bomb. And he did drop one seed in each container. So working with seeds, working with mitti, all working with plants is all very therapeutic. At Helen Keller Center, in Mape, that is Navi Mumbai, they had a little area where they just had 4 concrete beds to make a sensory garden. Because believe me, these children are both deaf and blind. So they need to use other senses like fragrance, touch, taste. So they have to make the other senses work for this dual sensory loss. They cannot see, they cannot hear. And so you cannot have overwhelming fragrance, and you need to, keep the sections separate, because otherwise the children will get confused. But they're so good, they write on the hand whatever they want, they explain to you on the hand. That's how the teachers communicate with them. It was quite an experience for me. Once I was taking the train to go to VT, and I saw a young man, with a walking stick, walking straight and nice. And, he fumbled. So I just held his hand. And after a minute, he grabbed my hand. I said, what is this? Of course, he was so young, so I didn't, think anything. And he caught my hand and he wrote on it. For a minute, I didn't understand. He wrote again. He said, when I was young, you had come to our center and you had taught me. I mean, just imagine, I just held his hand and the touch of my hand